Sarah Hanson-Young, welcome to the program.
Good morning, thanks for having me, Dave.
I'll come to Ken Henry's view on why this legislation is better than the current set of laws that we have. But just first on this morning's offer from Murray Watt on native forest logging. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I think it's good to see the government putting some issues on the table that we've raised, that we've been talking to them about. We obviously have to go through the details of these things. We haven't seen any detailed amendments from the government or anything that kind of spells out exactly how this would work. But I've been working pretty hard to convince the government that we need to have more protections in this bill because as it is, it actually is a step backwards. And rather than protecting our native forests, protecting our climate, it's all about fast-tracking projects. The whole point of the Environment Protection Act is to protect nature. And if we don't have a step forward for protecting nature, then it's failing to do its job. It just doesn't do what it says on the tin.
Okay, and I will come back to whether this bill improves on the current set of laws that we have when it comes to nature. But you met yesterday with Murray Watt, as I understand it, and presumably he went through this native forest logging concession, a 3-year transition for regional forestry agreements to comply with the new national environmental standards. Is that something you welcome?
Look, we will. We'll talk about this when we see the details and when we, when my party room's able to have a proper discussion.
But what about you
three more years of the destruction of our native forests when we've got 2,000 plus species already endangered in this country, where we've got billions of dollars of taxpayer money already spent subsidising an industry that's about destroying our native forests. I mean, it's 2025 and it's time we ended native forest logging, protected these beautiful ancient forests that aren't just there for the richness of biodiversity, but they're so important when it comes to combating climate change. They are carbon sinks. In fact, one of the easiest and fastest ways of helping Australia meet our emissions targets is by saving our native forests and stopping them being logged.
So you could suggest a shorter time frame for this transition then, instead of 3 years, 2 years, 1 year?
Look, I think the time frame, at first blush, I think as I said, another 3 years of destroying our forests is pretty. I don't think in any way deals with the urgency of protecting our native forests now. But of course, we also then need to make sure what does the standards mean? What does meeting those standards? How do we actually make sure our forests are protected? That they're not just protected for the animals that live within them, but that they're protected for our climate. I mean, a lot of people would be shocked to know, David, that under existing law, it's totally okay to log a native forest where there is endangered species.
And that's the point, isn't it? That under the existing law, there's an exemption for regional forestry agreements.
That's right.
Surely this, even if it's 3 years to transition, is an improvement.
Well, look, I mean, this is why we will kick the tyres on this and we'll look at it.
But would you really vote no to an improvement for native forest?
I think we will have to get to the details and make sure it actually is. The devil's always in the details, so we'll have a good look at this. We'll kick the tyres on it. But let me say, I have been crystal clear with the Minister that we need protections for native forests. I've said it publicly, I've said it privately, I've said it repeatedly. So the fact that they've put this on the table today is a good sign that they're starting to listen. But there's plenty of other things in this bill too that need fixing. I mean, what was tabled in the Parliament is actually a step backwards from the status quo.
So explain
it doesn't include native forest
why is
protections.
It a step backwards from the current legislation?
One of the most egregious parts of this package is that it fast-tracks coal and gas projects. So under the current law, coal and gas projects are treated the same as everything else. There's a process that you go through. Under this proposal from Labor, coal and gas projects could be approved within 30 days, fast-tracked, sped up, accelerated
But they would also have to...
at the exact time when we actually have to be reducing emissions, doing more for climate action.
But they would also have to comply, those projects, coal and gas and everything else, with the new national environmental standards, which they currently don't.
Coal and gas projects have to apply by their applications are assessed under the existing law, just like anything else. Forestry is carved out, salmon farming in Tasmania is carved out, land clearing in places like Queensland is carved out.
But again, these new laws would introduce these national environment standards for all of these things. To come to this point that it's worse than what we've currently got. I mean, Ken Henry has a very different view on this. You know, even before the latest concessions the government's offered you, he's been urging the parliament to get behind this. New national environment standards, an EPA, which we don't currently have, as a cop on the beat, as it's called, tougher penalties for environmental breaches. Surely this is better than the current laws we have.
Well, the problem is, David, is that the existing law is riddled with holes, loopholes and get-out clauses. What the government's put on the table doesn't close any of those, puts more in, and allows coal and gas to be fast-tracked. So the government's talking about wanting to speed up approvals for renewables and housing. But what they're not saying is that this also speeds up approvals for coal and gas, for fossil fuels. So not only have they refused to work with the Greens on putting in place a climate trigger or putting in place considerations of the pollution that these coal and gas mines make, both here in Australia and overseas, but they're actually allowing them to put the foot on the accelerator, and that needs to be stopped. That would be a terrible step backwards.
But don't decisions need to be made more speedily? I mean, take a look at this. This is the renewables rollout at the moment and the long delays in this graph from RenewMat. At the moment, battery projects taking, I think it's 14 months. This is the mean time it takes to approve a battery project. Something like 16 months for solar, 34 months for a wind project, an onshore wind project. Some of them, as Ken Henry has pointed out, can take up to 9 years to approve. We're not going to achieve net zero by 2050 under the current laws, are we?
Well, and we're not going to achieve net zero if we continue destroying our native forests either. So and rampant land clearing.
But again,
we're not going to. But let me be clear, David. We're not going to get to net zero if we keep opening new coal and gas mines. And under these rules that have been tabled by the government, they want to allow them to be sped up. There's a reason that companies like Chevron, BHP, Santos are all backing what the government tabled. They want this because they know, alongside renewables, they think they're going to be able to be in the fast lane. My view is that would be a terrible step backwards.
Well, a fast lane for either a quicker yes or a quicker no is the point here.
Except that this is a government that has approved 32 coal and gas projects since they came to government, right? 5 since the election, since May. So I've got no hope that they're going to be getting fast no's. I think they'll be getting fast yeses unless we keep them in the slow lane.
Okay, but you would get, as Ken Henry points out, a new EPA, new environmental standards. The government's now offering you a transition on native forest logging. Are you really willing to make the perfect the enemy of the good here?
Look, no. What we want to make sure is that there is a package that genuinely protects nature and puts that protection front and centre. What the government has tabled so far doesn't do that. So they do need to work with us to try and fix it and improve it. And I'm up for that. I met with the Minister on the weekend. We're working hard on this. But also Labor have to pick a side here. You know, I listened to the commentary before this interview, and you know, on one hand they're saying, oh, they're willing to get a deal done with the coalition that fast tracks coal and gas, that makes life easier for coal and gas, that doesn't stop rampant land clearing, that doesn't stop the destruction of our native forests, right? They're happy to do that, but then on the other hand they're saying, oh, we'll work with the Greens to fix all these things. What does Labor actually want? What is the objective? What is the objectives of this law? It should be about protecting our environment and protecting our climate.
So where is it at now for you, just before we leave this issue? What's the red line that you still are holding? What does the government need to do to get your vote?
Well, we definitely want to make sure that we are protecting native forests and ensuring that is done.
But you've welcomed the progress on that?
Well, I'm absolutely welcoming the progress, but we have to kick the tyres to see if that really does make the difference it needs to. We also want to make sure that we're not seeing coal and gas, fossil fuel projects accelerated. We wanted to see these projects assessed for the climate damage that they do, the damage that their carbon pollution has on the environment. And the government is being stubborn about that. I mean, I think it's crazy. 2025, you're talking about a new set of environment laws and it doesn't even consider the climate pollution that a coal or gas mine takes in, that makes.
Just to be clear for people on that, it wouldn't be considered as part of the approval process, but climate emissions and mitigation plans would have to be submitted as part of a reporting requirement. That's a new transparency measure that's not there at the moment.
So we've pushed the government to at least require some disclosure of the amount of pollution that coal and gas mines will make. Mind you, they won't admit what the big pollution is. What's called Scope 3. When it's burnt offshore. That's where the big damage is done. But then I asked the question. If you're going to disclose and be upfront about the amount of pollution, even just here in Australia, that these mines create, but you stop the minister being able to consider that in whether he decides to approve or knock back a mine, it does seem a bit crazy.
Okay, but again,
it's like going to the bank and saying, the bank says, oh, we want all your statements, we want to know how much you earn, what you spend before you apply for a loan, and then they're not allowed to look at it.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of crazy.
But once again, it's something that's not there at the moment at all. There's no requirement at all at the moment. This would be an improvement from your perspective.
Well, it would be a disclosure of the pollution,
okay.
But the question is, what's that for, if not to give some direction to the minister or to the EPA that this is damaging pollution and it's going to be damaging for the environment.
Let's turn to Australia's decision to withdraw its bid for the COP Climate Summit next year. Turkey will host instead. You've called this outcome a failure of diplomacy and a failure of domestic leadership from the Albanese government. What could it have done to convince Turkey to pull out?
Look, I think it's really disappointing to see Australia not be able to secure this bid. And as you know, as a South Australian, I was very keen to see Adelaide host this COP. But I don't think the diplomatic effort was put in. I think the government at a federal level was pretty half-hearted about this. I mean, it seems to be an open secret amongst those close to this that there were people within DFAT and senior members of the government who didn't want this because of the pressure that it would bear on Australia in relation to our fossil fuel exports.
Okay, but coming back to the question, the government did manage to win over everyone except for Turkey. What could it have done? What should it have done to force out Turkey?
Well, look, I think there could have been, of course, an ability to convince, who knows what Australia put on the table. I'm told Australia wasn't prepared to offer Turkey much at all.
So, you mean they should have offered money?
Well, look, these things are about negotiation. And if you've got most of the world saying Australia should have hosted the COP, and yet Australia pulls out, abandons not just...
to be clear, are you saying we should have bought off Turkey?
No, I'm saying that there are diplomatic ways that you could negotiate and try and see what kind of arrangement you could get to with Turkey.
Right.
And in previous years, governments have had to do all sorts of things. But did Australia try everything? I don't believe they did, David. And I don't believe they did because they were under pressure from the fossil fuel industry for Australia not to host it.
What about Chris Bowen? He gets this job of President for Negotiations. Is that significant in your view, and can he handle both that and his current role?
I've seen some of the commentary about whether Chris Bowen can do both jobs. I think, well, women do it every day. We work at home and we work at work, so, you know, I'm not too worried about that. But I think this at least has Australia involved at some level, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. Final one, social media age limit that's coming in a few weeks. The aim here, of course, is to stop powerful tech giants exploiting kids with addictive social media that can have real harm to their well-being. You've opposed this from the outset, though. Have any of the pleas from parents or children to support this influenced you at all?
Look, I really understand the desperation of parents on this, and as someone who's had teenagers and understand that power that social media can have over not just young people but all of us. I mean, I bet you're a bit of a doom scroller when you let yourself kind of get lost in it, David.
I'm off social media. It's good for my health.
But the problem here is, this isn't forcing the social media companies to actually be safe, to actually clean up their act. It bans young people from being able to be on it, only up to the age of 16, of course, and then it's a free-for-all. So it doesn't clean up any of those damaging elements, the dangerous algorithms, the insidious targeting of advertising that uses people's own data to then force advertising down their throats. There are things that can be done to force legally companies like the big social media companies to be legally required to be safe for all users. Because I'm worried that what happens here is that some young people will be, thrown off the system, and therefore, parents will work with them. I'm worried about the kids who fall through the cracks, either are still on there when they shouldn't be, based on the age, or find themselves in even darker places on the internet. And I think that is a real risk. Putting in place a kind of false sense of protection doesn't make our children safer, and it doesn't make these platforms safer for everybody. I think one of the things that Australia should do is ban digital advertising for anyone under 18. You shouldn't be able to scrape, these companies shouldn't be able to scrape young people's data and then target them with advertising. If that was in place, these social media companies wouldn't care about having to have young people. And look, it hits them at their business model.
That's an interesting suggestion, but once again, are you at risk of making the perfect the enemy of the good by opposing what many would argue will help a lot of kids?
Look, the law's in place, right? It starts on December 10, it's happening. My concern is what happens on December 10 when young people fall through the cracks, work their way around it. I mean, I don't know about your kids, but I know, my daughter and her friends would have easily been able to get around this. They're smart kids.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true. But let me ask you this finally. Are you encouraging kids come December 10 to get off social media or stay on social media?
Look, I think we need to make sure they're in places that are safe. And if they are not safe, then encourage young people to find other ways to connect.
So should they get off social media or not?
Well, if you're under 16, that's the law, that you shouldn't be on these platforms. My concern is making sure that kids can work with parents to ensure that where they are online, because this isn't kicking kids off the internet, let's be honest, right? You can be in a logged out mode through an internet browser, and it's a free-for-all. So that's going to be the issue here.
That's still
how do parents work with their children to make sure when they're online, whether it's through a social media app or on the internet, that they're actually safe? And I'm worried that we've given parents a false sense of security, and the government's going to have to do more. A digital duty of care, requiring these companies to legally have to provide safe spaces and stopping them at their business model. Why should they be able to advertise and target our children? And these companies get off on this stuff, and we need to hold them to account.
Sarah Hanson-Young, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.